He built his empire on her brilliance. Then left her for someone shinier. She didn't scream. She didn't chase. She vanished into silence. But behind closed doors, she was signing documents that would one day rip the ground from under his feet. And when she returned, she didn't just want closure. She came to collect his crown. They say the cruelest betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the people who once swore they'd protect your heart. The air inside the Fontaine Hotel ballroom was thick with luxury. Glittering chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks, casting sharp white light on everything, from $10,000 gowns to polished marble floors. Every step echoed with quiet wealth. Every smile was rehearsed. At the center of it all stood Jordan Malik, tech mogul and media darling, raising a glass to the crowd as the string quartet faded into silence. "To love, and to loyalty," he said smoothly. "And to my future, with the woman who completes me." He turned, offering his hand to a tall, statuesque woman in a scarlet designer dress, Delilah Voss, a woman whose beauty glimmered with the kind of polish that only came from private stylists and legacy money. Applause followed. Cameras clicked. Champagne was sipped. But a few feet away, at a dimly lit corner table that no one seemed eager to glance at, sat Alana Brooks Malik, Jordan's first wife. His real partner. The woman who helped build his empire from a one-bedroom apartment with nothing but code, coffee, and a dream they once believed in together. She wasn't crying. Not tonight. That had been done, in private, in pieces, in silence. Instead, Alana sat still, composed. Her deep brown skin glowed under the cool lights, her sleek black dress hugging her figure with quiet dignity. Her natural curls framed a face that wore exhaustion not from age, but from endurance. She was once the co-architect of his empire. The strategist who negotiated his first acquisition deal. The woman who pulled 16-hour days while Jordan pitched to VCs. But now, she was just the woman he outgrew. Or so he thought. Their divorce had been swift, calculated. Jordan cited irreconcilable ambitions. But everyone knew, he wanted someone who looked good on covers, not someone who challenged his decisions in the boardroom. Delilah was the prize. Alana had become, in his eyes, a placeholder. What he didn't know, was that Alana hadn't walked away empty-handed. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. She watched as Jordan kissed Delilah's hand for the photographers. She listened to the clinking glasses, the fake congratulations. And for a moment, the weight of all those years, 10 years of partnership, loyalty, sacrifice, pressed on her chest like a vice. But then she looked down at her clutch. Inside, a small silver key. To a future no one here could imagine. A future built in secret, in silence. The room continued to celebrate. Jordan laughed easily. Delilah waved like royalty. No one noticed Alana rising from her seat. She walked toward the exit, not rushed, not bitter, just certain. With every step, her mind replayed the night he told her she wasn't the image this next phase needed. How he'd traded her years of loyalty for a photo op. But that night, as she stepped out into the cold air, her expression changed. Not sorrow. Not rage. Resolve. Jordan had chosen wealth over loyalty. But Alana had built her own kind of wealth, quietly, brilliantly, and far beyond his reach. And soon, the world would find out. Not tonight. Not here. But very, very soon. Because the one mistake Jordan Malik had made, the one that would cost him everything, was assuming that the woman he replaced had nothing left to offer. He was wrong. Long before the gala, before the photographers, the penthouses, and the tailored apologies, Alana Brooks had stood shoulder to shoulder with Jordan Malik, not as his ornament, but as his equal. They met at a tech incubator in Atlanta, two young minds fighting for recognition, for funding, for the chance to break out of generational ceilings neither of them had asked for. Alana came from grit, raised by a nurse and a bus driver. She understood the value of precision, of planning, of never depending on luck. Jordan? He was raw charisma, half-formed ideas wrapped in a salesman's smile. What he had in charm, Alana matched with clarity. She sharpened him. She taught him how to speak to venture capitalists, how to pivot when a pitch flopped, how to listen when failure whispered in the backroom. She made him credible. When they married, it wasn't about rings or titles. It was about vision. Alana wasn't a wife in the traditional sense. She was COO in everything but name. She handled contracts, read legal clauses Jordan didn't understand, negotiated equity splits behind closed doors. And yet, slowly, something shifted. It began with small things. Jordan started going to meetings without telling her. He hired image consultants who suggested Alana soften her look. They said she was too intense, too intellectual for branding. Let the investors see someone approachable, they'd say. Someone lighter. Then came the subtle distance. The new assistant who somehow always found ways to exclude Alana from strategic emails. The executive retreats she was no longer invited to. And the ultimate insult, Jordan telling a mutual friend, Alana's smart, but she doesn't get where I'm headed now. He was heading toward image. Toward flash. Toward Delilah Voss, a legacy fashion heiress with followers, fame, and the kind of allure money could magnify. And Alana? He positioned her as part of the past. Too sharp. Too serious. Too black. When she found the divorce papers folded neatly in a leather binder on her desk, no conversation, no warning, something in her broke. But not in the way he expected. Because what Jordan forgot was that while he'd been chasing cameras, Alana had been studying leverage. You see, while she was COO in spirit, she had also been smart in silence. In year 4 of their startup, she had insisted on creating a holding company to manage international licenses. That company, Roseanne Equities, had been placed in her name. Quietly. Legally. Jordan never questioned it. He trusted her then. Or maybe he just never read the paperwork she handed him to sign. Over the years, Roseanne Equities grew. It purchased smaller stakes in Jordan's spin-off ventures, in supplier chains, in real estate the company leased. And when they divorced, Jordan got the company name. But Alana kept the keys to its infrastructure. At the time, she hadn't realized what she'd built. She only knew she couldn't walk away empty. It wasn't about revenge. Not then. It was about survival. About not being erased. But the more she watched Jordan climb, the more she saw him erase her role, reframe their history, and flaunt a new woman as his first real partner, the more she began to understand. This wasn't about the marriage anymore. This was about narrative. And Alana? She still had the pen. In private, she met with financial analysts. She reorganized Roseanne's structure. She ensured that, when the time came, her ownership would not just be legal, but visible. Jordan had left her behind. But she'd never left the empire. And now, with Delilah at his side and the cameras back on him, Jordan Malik was about to learn what happens when the woman you replace is the woman who still owns your foundation. It began with a whisper. A headline that appeared at 9:17 a.m. the following Monday, just 2 days after the gala. Not from a gossip blog, but from a financial publication with real credibility. Roseanne Equities quietly acquires controlling stake in Malik Holdings. No one paid attention at first. Not even Jordan. He was in New York by then, giving an interview on a rooftop overlooking Central Park, Delilah perched beside him like a designer accessory. He laughed when the journalist asked him about his ex-wife. I wish her well, he said with a polished smile. We were just different chapters. But back in Atlanta, emails were flying. Phones were ringing. Board members were reading a different story, one where Malik Holdings' real estate holdings, tech licenses, and supplier channels were no longer under Jordan's full control. They were under hers. Alana had pulled the trigger. Through Roseanne Equities, her quiet shell turned power broker, she had acquired dormant but strategic shares. She had secured proxy votes from disillusioned investors. She had used his own complacency against him. By noon, Jordan's CFO had called an emergency meeting. By 3 p.m., the media had caught on. And by 6 p.m., Jordan's name was trending, not for innovation, but for ignorance. But the true twist? It didn't come from the press. It came from Alana herself. That evening, she arrived at a high-profile tech summit, the very one she had once been banned from attending as non-essential. Dressed in an ivory pantsuit with no logo, no stylist, and no entourage, she stepped onto the stage unannounced during a leadership panel. The moderator blinked, confused. But the room? The room went still. Alana took the mic with no script. No teleprompter. I've been asked why I disappeared from the Malik brand, she began. Why, after co-building it from the ground up, my name vanished from documents and dinner parties. The crowd leaned in. She paused, then continued, her voice calm but razor-sharp. I disappeared, because someone thought I was expendable. Replaceable. Too sharp. Too much. She glanced at the back of the room, where Jordan stood frozen, Delilah stiff beside him. But what he forgot, she continued, is that while he was chasing headlines, I was acquiring leverage. Quietly. Legally. Completely. A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium. I am now the majority shareholder of Malik Holdings, she said plainly. Effective immediately, the board will be undergoing structural review. I won't be erasing the past, but I will be rewriting the future. Jordan stepped forward from the back of the hall, his face pale beneath the perfect lighting. You can't. I already have, she interrupted, without looking at him. Silence. Then thunderous applause. Not just from activists or underdogs, but from executives. Founders. Women who had been erased. Men who knew they'd underestimated her. People who suddenly understood that Alana wasn't just the ex-wife. She was the architect. The strategist. The one who played the long game while everyone else was chasing headlines. Jordan didn't speak again that night. Delilah disappeared before the cameras turned off. And Alana? She stood beneath the stage lights, not with vengeance, but with vindication. This was the twist. Not a scandal. Not a scream. But a strategic, irreversible shift in power. And it didn't just change the story. It changed who got to tell it. The days following Alana's return to power weren't loud. They were silent, and that silence terrified Jordan Malik more than any scandal ever could. Inside Malik Holdings, the shift began subtly. Executive emails were rerouted. Calendar invites started coming from unfamiliar names. By midweek, 3 senior board members had quietly stepped down, replaced by new appointees whose loyalty lay not with the founder's smile, but with the woman who had built the house he claimed as his own. Alana didn't gloat. She didn't issue grand memos or fire anyone in front of a crowd. She simply made changes. Strategic ones. The kinds of changes a person makes when they've been watching, planning, and remembering everything. She reinstated equity audits. She overhauled the mentorship program that had once only promoted men. She created a fund within the company that would support underrepresented founders, specifically, women who'd been told to soften their tone or stay behind the scenes. Each move was precise. Purposeful. Meanwhile, Jordan spiraled. His publicist cancelled 2 press appearances. The stock dipped, not drastically, but noticeably. And Delilah? She stopped appearing on his arm altogether. The same people who once praised Jordan for vision now whispered about arrogance. The VC circles that once toasted his modern family image now questioned how he lost controlling interest to his ex-wife. But perhaps the most devastating moment came the following Monday, when Jordan tried to log into the company's leadership dashboard. Access denied. The system had been restructured. His name was still listed, but under the title, former CEO, consultant status pending. He called the new board chair. No answer. He texted Alana. 1-word reply, reviewed. And just like that, Jordan realized what it meant to be on the other side of the door he used to slam shut. He had built his empire on charm, speed, and style. But Alana had built her legacy on silence, structure, and strategy. And now? She was the only one who knew where every foundation beam was buried. Still, the most striking thing about Alana's rise wasn't what she took back, but how she took it. In her first address as executive chair, she stood in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the skyline. She wore no jewelry, no designer badge, just a deep navy blouse and a calm, commanding presence. This isn't about revenge, she said plainly to the room of stunned executives. It's about remembering who built this with me and who was erased from the story. Some looked away. Others leaned in, realizing they were watching a masterclass in what real leadership looked like. I'm not here to punish anyone, Alana added. I'm here to redirect the future. And just like that, the fear in the room transformed into respect. Because Alana didn't just take power. She redefined it. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the company he once ruled, Jordan now walked through hallways where interns avoided eye contact and executives offered clipped greetings. He was no longer the architect of the brand. He was a ghost of its former illusion. Alana hadn't destroyed him. She'd simply made him irrelevant. By the end of the quarter, Malik Holdings had a new identity. The media called it the most elegant corporate shift in recent memory. Investors praised Alana's streamlined strategies. Staff spoke quietly of a culture shift they hadn't realized they needed. But across town, in a penthouse built for ego, Jordan Malik stared at his wall of framed magazine covers, now relics of a man who had mistaken attention for respect. The office was quiet. Delilah hadn't come by in weeks. Her name had quietly disappeared from company PR. No press statements. No explanations. Just absence. And maybe that was wise. Jordan sat at his desk, opening emails he no longer had power to answer. He scrolled past press releases, written in a tone he didn't recognize, carrying Alana's calm authority. He watched live streams of her speaking at conferences where she'd once been too intellectual, where he'd once sat alone in the spotlight. And he realized something he'd never admitted before. He hadn't just lost his company. He had never owned it in the first place. He had built visibility. Alana had built value. For years, he believed that replacing her with someone more marketable, more pliable, was a smart move. But Delilah had brought him spotlight, not strategy. And once the lights dimmed, there was no substance to stand on. What stung most wasn't the loss of control. It was that the world was doing just fine without him. Meanwhile, Alana's life had bloomed. Not with noise, but with clarity. In her new office, modern, sunlit, and filled with fresh energy, she sat with interns who reminded her of herself at 22. She mentored without judgment. She led without pretense. Her personal life had begun to breathe again. She reconnected with her sister, reached out to friends she'd lost during her years of strategic isolation. She even allowed herself to laugh in meetings, something she hadn't done freely in years. She walked home now. Not in fear, not with weight on her chest, but with calm. Each step no longer echoed with self-doubt or memories of being silenced. The world looked the same, but she had changed. And one morning, she received an envelope, no return address. Inside, a short note in Jordan's handwriting. I underestimated you. And I'm finally learning what that costs. She read it once. Then she placed it in a drawer, not out of hate, but closure. She didn't need apologies. She didn't need his guilt. She had reclaimed something far greater. Her name. Her legacy. Her voice. She hadn't needed to destroy him to win. That wasn't her goal. She had simply removed herself from a story where she was no longer honored, and wrote her own, in ink too bold to erase. And that, in the end, was the deeper revenge. Not ruining his name, but living in full truth without needing his permission. It was raining the night Alana took the stage. Not a storm. Just a soft, steady rain that slicked the streets and blurred the city lights. Inside the auditorium, however, everything was sharp. Every eye fixed, every phone recording, every heart bracing for something they hadn't yet named. The event wasn't flashy. It wasn't televised. It wasn't even heavily sponsored. It was a youth entrepreneur summit hosted by a grassroots foundation, one of the first Alana had funded after regaining control. No headlines. No VIP rows. Just folding chairs, notebooks, and possibility. She stepped on stage in a charcoal suit, hair pinned back, face bare. No performance. No polish. Just presence. The applause was warm, but not deafening. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Alana stood for a moment, letting the quiet settle. Then she spoke, not from a script, but from a scar. There was a time I believed that loyalty would protect me, she began. That if I built something with love and labor, it couldn't be taken from me. The audience was silent. Not with disinterest, but with recognition. I was wrong. It was taken. I was replaced. Not because I lacked value, but because I made people uncomfortable by knowing my worth. She paused, letting the weight land. But I learned something. When someone erases you from the story, you don't have to beg to be written back in. She looked out at the room, at young women with braids and glasses and brilliance in their eyes. At boys who'd never seen a black woman in power speak with this much stillness. At mentors who nodded, quietly broken open. You start a new chapter. You become the author. And then, if you're wise, you make room for others to write, too. Backstage, her assistant handed her a copy of the summit's new mentorship handbook. Across the top, Brooks Foundation for Equity and Enterprise. She smiled softly, not because her name was on it, but because the girl she used to be never thought it would be. Across town, in a dim office, Jordan sat watching the live stream on a laptop. Not out of bitterness. Not even regret. Just reality. His name wasn't mentioned. His image wasn't referenced. Because he wasn't needed anymore. And that, perhaps, was the most cutting part of all. Alana had moved on. The applause at the summit grew, but not into frenzy. It was warm. Honest. Lasting. She closed with one line. Power isn't how loudly you speak. It's how deeply your truth echoes when you finally do. The lights dimmed. She stepped down from the stage. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had something to prove. She had already proved it. To herself. To the world. And most importantly, to the woman she used to silence in the mirror. Have you ever been replaced by someone with less, just because you had more to say? Tell us in the comments. Not just what you lost, but what you built when no one was watching. If this story hits something deep, like it to honor the women who build in silence. Share it with someone who's planning their quiet comeback. And subscribe if you believe that true power doesn't need an audience. Just the right moment.